Katherine Walsh destroyed 6 Navy SEALs in 3 minutes. Not with paperwork, not with regulations, with bullets. The basic training instructor who'd been teaching push-ups to teenagers had just outshot the military's most elite operators, 28-12. While they worked as a coordinated 6-man team, she worked alone. While they missed the impossible targets, she hit every single one. Now Captain Hayes stood frozen, watching this middle-aged woman who'd just shattered everything he thought he knew about combat. "Ma'am," Hayes whispered, his voice shaking. "Who the hell are you?" Katherine lowered her smoking rifle and smiled for the first time in 5 years. Not the polite instructor smile she'd worn like a mask. The cold, calculating smile of someone who'd killed more enemies than these 6 operators had even seen. "My name isn't Katherine Walsh," she said quietly. "That's just what they told me to call myself when they buried my real identity so deep that governments pay billions to keep it classified." The silence stretched across the training range like a death sentence. "My real name is Operator 77, and you just made the biggest mistake of your military careers." 3 hours earlier, Katherine Walsh had been nobody special. A 4-5-year-old instructor teaching fresh recruits how to hold a rifle without shooting themselves. That changed when Captain Derek Hayes kicked down her office door with 5 special ops operators behind him, all swagger and arrogance. "We're not here for basic training," Hayes announced. "My team needs advanced combat instruction, real warfare simulation." Katherine looked up from her paperwork. These 6 men had just returned from classified operations. They wore their recent combat experience like cologne, too strong and obvious. The irony was crushing. Hayes and his team had no idea they were looking at the woman who'd laid the groundwork for half their recent missions. The intelligence networks they'd used in Syria? Katherine had spent 18 months building them while posing as a cleaning woman. The tactical approaches that made their operations possible? She'd written the playbook. But Katherine Walsh, mild-mannered instructor, simply smiled politely. "I teach fundamentals," Katherine replied calmly. "Fundamentals?" Sergeant Martinez laughed. "Lady, we just cleared terrorist compounds in Syria. We don't need some middle-aged instructor teaching us how to aim." If Martinez had known that the woman sitting across from him had personally eliminated the terrorist leaders who made his successful operations possible, he might have chosen different words. But Katherine's real identity was buried under layers of classification so deep that even mentioning Operator 77's existence required presidential authorization. Hayes leaned against her desk. "We want live fire exercises, moving targets, combat stress scenarios. Think you can handle that?" Katherine studied their faces. Cocky, dismissive. They saw a basic instructor who'd probably never left Fort Bragg. What they didn't see was a woman who'd operated in 14 different countries, spoke 6 languages fluently, and had more confirmed kills than their entire unit combined. The psychological profiles she'd studied flashed through her mind. Hayes, overconfident but competent, weak point was his need for validation. Martinez, technically skilled but arrogant, could be provoked into mistakes. Thompson, steady but conventional, no adaptability under unexpected pressure. Williams, good soldier, poor independent judgment. Carter, follows orders well, panics when isolated. Rodriguez, strong but predictable, relies too heavily on standard tactics. 5 years of maintaining her cover identity had taught Katherine patience. But these 6 were about to test limits she'd forgotten she had. They were about to learn how wrong assumptions could be. "Range E, 1,400 hours," Katherine said simply. "Bring your A game." The team exchanged glances. This was going to be easy. "What's the wager?" Hayes asked, grinning. Katherine's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. A shadow of the operator who'd once negotiated with warlords and cartel leaders. "If you win, I'll recommend you for advanced instructor positions. If I win." She paused, something dangerous flickering in her eyes. "You'll learn what real combat actually looks like." As they left, laughing among themselves, Katherine made a secure phone call. "This is Operator 77, she said quietly into the encrypted line. "Authorization code Tango 77 Alpha. I need to break cover." The voice on the other end was quiet for a long moment. "Understood. How deep?" "Full disclosure. It's time these operators learned the difference between completing missions and creating the conditions that make missions possible." "Roger that. Your psychological and physical profiles are being reactivated. Fair warning. Once you do this, there's no going back to normal." Katherine looked out her window at the recruits practicing basic drills. Young soldiers who might never have to face the kind of enemies she'd spent 20 years hunting. "Normal was always temporary," she said. "Some lessons can only be taught through demonstration." Katherine raised an eyebrow. "More advanced?" "Live fire exercises." One of Hayes's teammates, Sergeant Martinez, interjected. "Real combat simulations. Moving targets, not simple range work." Katherine slowly closed her files. These men were trying to test her. They were doing what no one had dared to do in 5 years, questioning her authority. "I see," she said calmly. "Could I get information about your experience?" Hayes proudly puffed his chest. 12 operations in the last 6 months. 2 in Syria, 3 in Africa, 7 in Eastern Europe. Total combat experience, 21 months. Katherine wanted to laugh inside. 21 months. She'd spent 3 years in Syria alone. "Impressive," she said. "Then let's do live fire exercises this afternoon. Meet me at Range E at 1,400 hours." Hayes and his team exchanged victorious glances. Finally, they could force this desk instructor to show her real capabilities. As Katherine watched them leave, she knew her carefully hidden identity for 5 years was about to be exposed, and perhaps it was time. By 1,300 hours, the entire base was buzzing. Word had spread. The elite special ops team was challenging Instructor Walsh to live combat exercises. $20 says she calls it off, whispered one recruit. 50 says she doesn't show up, another replied. What the betting soldiers didn't know was that Katherine had spent the last 3 hours in a secure communication room, video conferencing with Pentagon officials who hadn't spoken her real name in 5 years. Operator 77. The voice of General Patricia Hayes crackled through encrypted speakers. "Are you certain about this exposure?" Katherine sat in the sterile room, her mild instructor facade already beginning to crack. "General, these operators are using tactics and intelligence I developed. They're taking credit for missions I made possible. It's time they understood the full scope of their ignorance." "The psychological evaluation team wants to remind you," another voice interjected, "that reactivating your operational persona after 5 years of dormancy could have consequences. You've been Katherine Walsh longer than some of these men have been soldiers." Katherine smiled coldly. "I've been Operator 77 for 20 years. Katherine Walsh was always just a costume." "Very well. Your authorization codes are being updated. Your classified service record is being partially declassified for educational purposes. And 77. General Hayes paused. "Show them what humility looks like." But Katherine showed up. At exactly 1,400 hours, she walked onto Range E wearing standard training fatigues. No tactical gear, no radio system, just her and a basic M4 carbine. The transformation was immediate and terrifying. Gone was the mild-mannered instructor who smiled politely at recruit mistakes. In her place stood something that moved with predatory grace, scanned the environment with the paranoid efficiency of someone who'd survived 20 years in places where relaxation meant death. Hayes and his team were already positioned, fully geared up like they were heading into Fallujah. They'd spent the last hour reviewing standard combat exercise protocols, discussing coordination strategies, preparing for what they assumed would be a straightforward demonstration of superior training and experience. "Where's your equipment?" Martinez asked, genuinely confused. "Don't need it," Katherine replied, checking her weapon with movements so smooth they seemed choreographed. What Martinez couldn't see was the muscle memory that had never faded. Katherine's fingers found the weapon's balance point automatically. Her stance shifted into firing position without conscious thought. Her breathing pattern changed to the controlled rhythm she'd used in firefights across 4 continents. The range setup was brutal. 30 moving targets, variable distances up to 150 meters, obstacles, wind effects, acoustic distractions designed to simulate combat stress. Even experienced operators struggled with this course. "Rules are simple," Hayes announced to the growing crowd of observers. "Most hits wins. 5-minute time limit." Katherine nodded, but her mind was already running tactical calculations that went far beyond simple target acquisition. She was reading wind patterns, calculating trajectory adjustments, identifying sight lines and movement patterns that would maximize efficiency while minimizing exposure time. "One question. You're 6 people. I'm 1. Fair fight?" Hayes grinned. "Problem with that?" "No," Katherine smiled back. "Just wanted to give you a sporting chance." The comment drew nervous laughter from the watching personnel, but something in Katherine's tone made the laughter die quickly. There was a certainty there, a confidence that transcended normal human capability and moved into something almost supernatural. Range Master Davidson called positions. Weapons hot in 10 seconds. Katherine's entire demeanor shifted. The mild-mannered instructor vanished completely. In her place stood something else entirely, something predatory, calculating, lethal. Her breathing slowed to a combat rhythm. Her eyes took on the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen too much death. Her hands moved with the unconscious precision of someone for whom violence was a second language. 5 seconds, Davidson shouted. Katherine closed her eyes for one moment. When she opened them, every trace of Katherine Walsh was gone. In her place stood Operator 77, the woman who'd single-handedly changed the course of 3 different conflicts and whose very existence had been erased from history to protect national security. The buzzer sounded. What happened next defied everything the observers thought they knew about marksmanship. Silence fell. Martinez's face changed. "What do you mean?" Hayes intervened. "The complex cleared in Damascus in October 2019, Katherine began explaining, was an operation planned for 18 months. Someone had to work there for months to gather intelligence, map floor plans, disable security systems, determine entry and exit routes." Hayes felt breathless. "I was there," Katherine completed. "I worked as a cleaning staff in the complex cafeteria. I could access every floor, see every room, know the location of every security camera. I prepared the ground for 18 months so you could successfully complete that operation." Martinez's face turned white. "Impossible. That operation, classified." Katherine cut him off. "I know, because I was the actual agent in that operation." Hayes began trembling. "Who are you?" Katherine took a deep breath. After 5 years, it was time to say her real name. "Katherine Walsh is my job. My real name, Operator 77. If a pin had dropped, they would have heard it. Operator 77, the most secret legend of the CIA and Special Forces. 3 years in Syria, 2 years in Afghanistan, 1 year in Africa on classified operations. Her identity was so secret it was only known as rumor, her actual existence doubted. And now she stood before them. Katherine moved like liquid death. The first 3 targets were down before Hayes's team had even shouldered their weapons. Not good shooting, impossible shooting. Targets moving at different speeds, different angles, different distances. She hit them all without seeming to aim. "What the hell?" Martinez shouted, struggling to track his first target. Katherine didn't respond. She was in a zone that transcended normal human capability. Every shot was perfect. Every movement was calculated. She flowed across the range like water, never presenting a static target, always positioning for the next impossible shot. What the watching crowd couldn't see was the tactical computer running in Katherine's mind. Decades of combat experience processing information at superhuman speed. target velocity calculations, wind drift compensations, threat priority assessments, escape route planning. Her brain was operating on multiple levels simultaneously, the way it had during her legendary 72-hour extraction from Mogadishu, where she'd held off an entire militia while protecting wounded civilians. But there was something else happening that even Katherine hadn't expected. Muscle memory that had been dormant for 5 years was reactivating with frightening intensity. Her body was remembering not just techniques, but entire operational mindsets. The way she'd moved through the bazaars of Kabul, every sense heightened to detect threats. The hypervigilance that had kept her alive during 18 months undercover in Damascus. The predatory patience she'd learned stalking high-value targets across the mountains of Pakistan. Target 4. Moving laterally at 75 meters. Down. Target 5. Zigzagging at 50 meters. Down. Target 6. Rising and falling behind cover. Down. Hayes's team managed their first hit. 1 target down, 5 operators working together. Katherine had dropped 9. "This isn't possible," Thompson whispered, watching her through his scope. "She's hitting targets I can't even see clearly." But what Thompson couldn't understand was that Katherine wasn't just shooting targets. She was demonstrating the difference between soldiers who follow procedures and operators who rewrite them in real time. Each shot was a lesson in physics, psychology, and the kind of split-second decision-making that separated legends from professionals. The psychological transformation was as dramatic as the physical one. Katherine could feel aspects of her personality that she'd suppressed for 5 years bubbling back to the surface. The cold, analytical mind that could calculate kill probabilities while maintaining casual conversation. The compartmentalization skills that allowed her to function normally hours after watching teammates die. The emotional shutdown that made impossible decisions feel routine. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. She'd spent 5 years in therapy learning to be Katherine Walsh, the normal person. Now, in 12 minutes of combat demonstration, Operator 77 was clawing her way back out, and Katherine wasn't sure she could control the process. The most terrifying part wasn't her accuracy, it was her speed. While the elite team deliberated, coordinated, adjusted for wind and distance, Katherine simply saw and fired. No hesitation, no second guessing. Pure, instinctive lethality honed by operations in places like Chechnya, where hesitation measured in milliseconds meant the difference between completing the mission and becoming a diplomatic incident. Target 15 was the game changer. A small disc, 100 meters out, swinging on a cable in crosswinds. The kind of shot that Olympic marksmen practiced for months to master. Katherine hit it without breaking stride. The crowd, watching from the sidelines, had gone completely silent. This wasn't a training exercise anymore. This was a master class in something beyond normal human capability. They were witnessing what 20 years of the world's most classified operations looked like when compressed into 5 minutes of pure demonstration. 22, someone counted. She's hit 22 targets. Hayes's team had managed 7. The psychological impact was devastating. These 6 operators had built their entire professional identities around being elite, being the best, being the tip of the spear. Now they were watching someone casually destroy that identity with the kind of effortless superiority that suggested they were children playing with toys. Katherine's movements had taken on an almost balletic quality. She wasn't just hitting targets, she was conducting a symphony of violence, each shot precisely timed, each position perfectly calculated. The rifle had become an extension of her will, responding to intentions that formed faster than conscious thought. But the most unnerving aspect for the observers was Katherine's expression. Throughout the impossible demonstration, her face remained perfectly calm, almost serene. This wasn't strain or effort, NB. This was someone operating so far within their capabilities that the seemingly supernatural performance was just another day at the office. Then came Target 30, the impossible one. A ball suspended 150 meters away, moving in 3 dimensions, affected by wind, barely visible to the naked eye. A shot so difficult that even Katherine's own instructors at the CIA's covert training facility had considered it theoretical rather than practical. Katherine stopped moving for the first time. She took a breath, and for one moment, everything went perfectly still. The watching crowd held their breath. Even the wind seemed to pause. In that moment of absolute silence, Katherine's mind flashed back to a rooftop in Damascus, where a similar impossible shot had saved an entire embassy staff from a terrorist attack. The same calculations, the same certainty, the same cold acceptance that some shots existed in the space between possible and necessary. She fired. The target exploded. The range fell into absolute silence. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. Katherine lowered her weapon and turned to face the stunned operators, her expression carrying the weight of 20 years' worth of impossible shots made under impossible circumstances. "Gentlemen," she said quietly, "let me introduce myself properly. My name is Operator 77. I've completed 47 classified missions across 4 continents. I have a perfect operational record spanning 20 years. And for the past 5 years, I've been teaching your basic training courses." Hayes could barely speak. That's impossible. Operator 77 is a myth. A legend." Katherine rolled up her sleeve, revealing a small but unmistakable tattoo, a black eagle with 77 beneath it. "No, Captain. I'm very real, and you just learned why legends sometimes choose to become teachers." Hayes stared at the destroyed targets, his face cycling through disbelief, horror, and finally acceptance. 30 targets. Katherine had hit every single one. His elite team had managed 7. The silence stretched across the range like a physical presence. Word was already spreading beyond the facility, encrypted messages flying to Pentagon offices, secure communications buzzing with reports of an impossible demonstration that was rewriting understanding of human capability. But what happened next revealed the true scope of Katherine's legend. As she stood among the debris of destroyed targets, her phone buzzed with a message that made her blood run cold. "Package delivered to room 237. Timer started. 72 hours. Katherine's face went white. The message was from an enemy she'd thought was dead, Viktor Kozlov, the arms dealer she'd supposedly killed in Prague 3 years ago. The man who'd sworn vengeance against Operator 77 before she'd put 2 bullets in his chest and watched him fall into the Vltava River. "Gentlemen," Katherine said quietly, her voice carrying a new urgency. "We have a problem. This demonstration just activated a dead man's switch I thought I'd never have to worry about." She showed the message to Hayes, whose tactical mind immediately grasped the implications. A bomb? Not just any bomb. Kozlov was trafficking nuclear materials through Eastern Europe. Before I took him down, he bragged about a failsafe, something designed to ensure Operator 77 could never truly retire. If I ever revealed my identity publicly. Katherine's voice trailed off as the full horror of the situation sank in. "Ma'am," Hayes said quietly, his voice carrying the respect reserved for battlefield legends. We had no idea." "Of course you didn't," Katherine replied, but her mind was already racing through possibilities. Kozlov had been presumed dead, but arms dealers like him always had contingency plans. The fact that he'd monitored her identity reveal meant he'd been watching, waiting, planning revenge for 3 years. That was the point. But the real shock was just beginning. As Katherine holstered her weapon, a convoy of black SUVs appeared on the horizon, kicking up dust clouds as they approached the range at high speed. Through the heat shimmer, observant eyes could make out the distinctive profiles of vehicles used by agencies that officially didn't exist. What Katherine didn't know was that Viktor Kozlov was very much alive, watching her every move through satellite feeds from a bunker in Serbia. The arms dealer had spent 3 years building a network designed for one purpose: making Operator 77 pay for destroying his empire. The demonstration she'd just given had been broadcast live to his organization, confirming that the legendary operative was not only alive but had just blown her cover in the most spectacular way possible. "Sir," one of Kozlov's lieutenants said, studying the multiple screens showing Katherine's impossible shooting demonstration, "should we accelerate the timeline?" Kozlov smiled, his face bearing the scars from the bullets Katherine thought had killed him. "Number. Let her enjoy her moment of triumph. In 72 hours, everyone she's ever cared about will understand the true cost of crossing Viktor Kozlov." Within an hour, Katherine's phone was ringing with calls from numbers that didn't appear on any directory. Pentagon, CIA, Joint Chiefs, NSA. The bureaucratic machine that had buried Operator 77 was scrambling to understand what had just happened and what it meant for operations currently running in 17 different countries. Colonel Davidson appeared at her elbow, his face pale with the kind of stress that came from realizing you'd been hosting a living legend without knowing it. "They want you back," he said simply, holding a satellite phone that crackled with encryption static. Katherine nodded, but her mind was focused on the clock now ticking in her head. 71 hours and 43 minutes until Kozlov's revenge came to fruition. She'd spent 5 years believing her enemies were behind her. Now she realized they'd simply been patient. "There's a new program," Davidson continued, reading from a classified briefing that had been transmitted directly to his personal device. "Project Prometheus. Training the next generation of elite operators for threats that don't officially exist. Hybrid warfare. Cyber-physical operations. Scenarios that blur the line between military action and covert intelligence work." Katherine looked at Hayes and his team. They stood at attention now, all swagger and arrogance replaced by genuine respect and a dawning understanding of how much they didn't know about the world they thought they were protecting. The irony was perfect. These 6 operators, who had challenged her authority based on their recent operational successes, were about to learn that their most impressive missions had been possible only because Katherine had spent years creating the conditions for their success. Intelligence networks in Syria that took 18 months to establish, safe houses in Afghanistan that required 2 years of cover identity work, weapons caches in Eastern Europe that had cost her 3 fingers on her left hand and a month in a Russian prison. "I'll do it," she said, "but these 6 are my first students." "Ma'am?" Hayes looked confused, still processing the fact that the woman he'd dismissed as a basic instructor had just demonstrated capabilities that existed in a realm beyond normal military training. Katherine walked over to him, her movement pattern subtly different now, no longer the careful steps of someone pretending to be ordinary, but the predatory efficiency of someone who'd learned to navigate environments where every footstep could trigger a mine, every shadow could hide a sniper, every friendly face could conceal a traitor. "Captain, you and your team just learned something invaluable. You learned that assumptions can get you killed, that underestimating people based on appearance is a fatal flaw, and that real strength often hides in plain sight." She gestured toward the destroyed targets, each one representing a lesson in humility that would reshape how these operators approached every future mission. "I didn't do this to humiliate you. I did it to teach you. Because someday, you might face an enemy who looks harmless but isn't. Someone who seems weak but could destroy you before you realize the danger." The wind picked up across the range, carrying with it the scent of cordite and the distant sound of helicopters approaching. Katherine recognized the distinctive rotor pattern of MH-60 Blackhawks configured for special operations transport. Her ride was arriving. Martinez stepped forward, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. "What do we do now?" "Now you learn what real training looks like," Katherine replied, watching the helicopters circle the range in a formation that spoke of pilots who'd operated in the world's most dangerous airspace. Not just how to shoot, but how to think, how to see patterns others miss, how to become the kind of operators who prevent wars instead of just fighting them. The lead helicopter touched down 50 meters away, its rotor wash creating a dust storm that forced everyone to shield their eyes. When the dust cleared, 6 figures in civilian clothes were walking toward the range, handlers from agencies whose existence was classified above the level of most cabinet secretaries. Hayes straightened, sensing that he was about to be inducted into a world he'd never imagined existed. "When do we start?" Katherine checked her watch, noting that exactly 4 hours had passed since Hayes had kicked down her office door with his arrogant demands for advanced training. 4 hours to completely rewrite 6 military careers and expose the hidden infrastructure that made their previous successes possible. Tomorrow, 0600 hours. "And gentlemen," she smiled, that cold, calculating smile again, not the polite expression of Katherine Walsh, but the predatory confidence of Operator 77. "Bring your A game, because now that you know who I really am, I won't be holding back anymore." As the team dispersed, Katherine remained on the range, looking at the scattered targets that represented the death of her cover identity and the rebirth of her true self. For 5 years, she'd been Katherine Walsh, the mild-mannered instructor. But that woman had just died in 12 minutes of perfect violence that would be studied and analyzed in classified facilities for decades to come. Operator 77 was back, and this time, she was going to forge a new generation of warriors who understood that true strength wasn't about domination. It was about knowing when to use it and when to hold back. The legend had returned, not to fight, but to teach others how to carry the weight of impossible decisions. Because sometimes, the greatest battles are won by those who choose not to fight them at all. Katherine Walsh's story shows us that real power sometimes lives in hiding. The most experienced warriors can appear the most ordinary, and sometimes, underestimating someone is the fastest way to learn who they really are. But this story goes deeper than just military prowess. It's about the hidden heroes who walk among us every day, the retired police officer teaching kindergarten, the former firefighter working as a librarian, the ex-paramedic driving a school bus. People who've seen humanity at its worst and its best, who've made impossible decisions under impossible pressure, who've chosen to use their hardest-earned wisdom to protect and nurture rather than to dominate. Katherine's transformation from Operator 77 to Instructor wasn't a step down, it was a step forward. She understood something that Hayes and his team had yet to learn. The greatest victory isn't defeating your enemy, it's making sure the next generation never has to face that enemy at all. Think about the people in your own life who seem ordinary but carry extraordinary stories. The quiet neighbor who never talks about their past. The unassuming coworker who deflects questions about their background. The humble teacher who somehow always knows exactly what to do in a crisis. How many of them are hiding skills, experiences, and wisdom that could change your understanding of what real strength looks like. Katherine spent 5 years being underestimated, dismissed, and overlooked. Not because she was weak, but because she was strong enough to let people think she was weak. That's a different kind of courage. The courage to let your ego take hits so that your mission can succeed. Have you encountered people like Katherine in your life? Those others underestimated but who actually possessed incredible abilities? Or maybe you're a Katherine Walsh yourself, hiding your true potential because the world isn't ready to see it, or because your real strength lies in protecting others rather than proving yourself. The most dangerous people aren't always the ones who look dangerous. Sometimes they're the ones teaching your children, fixing your car, or working quietly in the background while others take credit for their contributions. They're the ones who understand that true power lies not in what you can destroy but in what you choose to protect. Share in the comments. Have you ever had to hide your identity or abilities? What would you have done in Katherine's place? Have you ever discovered that someone you underestimated was actually extraordinary? And remember, stay tuned so you don't miss the next hidden hero's story. Because sometimes, the greatest warriors walk among us disguised as teachers, mechanics, nurses, librarians, and ordinary people doing extraordinary work that keeps the world turning. Every person has a story. Every story matters. And sometimes the most incredible stories are hidden in the most unexpected places, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. If Katherine's story moved you, hit that like button, because every like tells us that stories like this matter, that hidden heroes deserve recognition. and that the quiet strength of ordinary-looking people doing extraordinary things needs to be celebrated. Subscribe to join our community of people who believe that heroism comes in all forms, that strength isn't always loud, and that the most important battles are often fought by people whose names will never make headlines, but whose actions make headlines possible. Because in a world that celebrates the obvious and the loud, we choose to honor the subtle and the silent. The people who could have been legends, but chose to be teachers instead. The warriors who won their greatest victory by never having to fight.